Thank you, Margot. Normally, if you mention the word youth to some media and marketing people, it tends to fill them with great despair. Not only is it normally prefixed with the word elusive, which tends to, which means they're not only a kind of alien species, but they're also kind of engaging in acts of subterfuge and wearing kind of camouflage as we go and meet them. The good news is researching youth is perfectly possible. There's only two rules. You have to get very close to them, and you tend to have to wear trainers. So that'd be my 2 bits of advice if you engage in one of these exercises. And that's kind of pretty much what we did. We got kind of up close and personal with them and spent a bit of time with just a smallish sample, 16, 13-and-a-half-year-olds, and went and spent some time with them, both in home. And the great advantage of being in home is that you get to poke around in their bedrooms and in their record collections or through their music libraries, and they can kind of actually show you what they're up to. I suppose the other way of wearing trainers these days is to engage them online, and we did something called live blogging, where we get them engaging with us online for a week or so, and they can upload stuff, they can shoot videos on their little webcams, they can upload a load of stuff and get engaged in kind of dialogue. These are really neat ways of researching young people, because you're kind of engaging them in a dialogue rather than in a strict kind of research exercise. And the reason we focused it on 13-and-a-half-year-olds wasn't just to make my life as miserable as possible. It was a really interesting tipping point. It's a point when ours suddenly see this little jump up from 12 to over 15. We start to see a number of stations they're listening to go up. Digital starts to rise. So it's a really interesting tipping point where we feel like a lot of their kid habits are starting to turn into adult habits. So it's a little bit before Margot's 15-year-old, but they're certainly on the track to becoming adults. I've done loads and loads of youth research. I've worn trainers for a long time. And there's some really interesting themes and trends which just make sense of kids across the ages, and they tend to be contradictions. So on the one hand, they're struggling with this need to be an individual, but the contradiction to that and what they're balancing it with is the need to belong. So you tend to get these two things kind of fighting with each other as they grow up. Desire for the adult world. They're desperate to be treated like adults, but they're also very keen to reject the previous generation. And again, you get this kind of contradiction playing out. You also get them adopting in a very frenetic way. I used to do lots of booze research, and you had this period when people are about 17 or 18 when they drink anything. They have aftershave, cleaning products, and they berserk, they go completely mental before you. And actually your life is about refining your drinking habits away from things like aftershave and cleaning products. The same is true at 13. There's kind of frenetic adoption, but they're completely cash-strapped. They're still living on, £5–10 pocket money, and they're not in charge of their own cash. So they're saving here to spend there. They're finding all sorts of ways of adopting in a mad way, but without much cash. Lots of contradictions going on, and as we look through our research at the 13-and-a-half-year-olds, keep these contradictions in your mental back pocket. Finding number one. What we found was really mainstream listening habits, actually. Really mainstream musical tastes. Lots of inherited bands, lots of stuff their mums and dads would have been into, and nothing particularly weird or tricksome in here. Lots of very mainstream stuff. So need to be an individual. Actually, this is need to belong stuff. This is need to be part of the group. Need to share music with my friends. Shared musical tastes are much more important at 13 than perhaps a bit later, when it's all about much more niche musical tastes and niche kind of trends. We also get when we look at what stations they're actually listening to, I think the theme in here was all about legacy. So what we tended to find was two to three stations emerging, but again, mainstream choices. And I think anecdotally what we found in here was that these were stations their parents listened to. Now, I've got a sample of 16, so I'm not pretending this is the whole world, but what we tended to find was there was a strong marry-up with what their parents are listening to. And I think this isn't rejection of the previous generation, this is desire for the adult world. This is sharing a conversation, sharing a moment with mum or dad, feeling grown up enough that you're kind of in the know, in the club with adult listening. So we tended to find they were inheriting quite easily these kind of legacy stations. And here's the main reason why. The main media moment for radio at 13.5 is the school run. It's in the car on the way in, and there's lots of in-car politics. There's lots of kind of finding a kind of happy medium between two kids and mum and the chaos of the school run. But this we discovered was the key media moment. And Margot talks about boredom relief. And I'm sure when I grew up in the 70s, I was bored most of the time. Kids nowadays have kind of got tons and tons of stuff to do. But when you get them home, when it's home time and when it's bedroom time, tons of homework. Actually, we found radio fell off the radar a little bit because what they want is something they can still concentrate on their homework whilst listening to. They tend to treat it much more as background, and they're tuning in a much less focused way. In car was the kind of key moment, or certainly one of the key moments that we discovered. Key benefit of radio, why are they into it? And we did recruit kids who were listening to the radio, we did recruit kids who were into music, but what is it that what role is it radio plays? It's all about assisted discovery. This is all about the hand-holding. So yes, they've got a need to be an individual. They are discovering their own taste. They're adopting in a fairly frenzied way. But what they need is a little bit of hand-holding. As they get older, they've got a much better idea of what it is they actually like. They've got a much better idea of what to type into the Last FM or Spotify box to work out what it is they want. At this age, what they're really looking for is someone just to help them through the maze and the confusion of new music. So we termed it assisted discovery, and we found radio was highly influential in leading people to purchasing music. Very strong link to how they purchase, very strong link to what they end up going on to explore further, and a very good outing for the top 40. Here you go. This has now been taken off the TV. Music on TV is highly fragmented, a very strange place now. Top 40 emerged as a really powerful property in radio, and you can imagine here, need to belong. You need to turn up at school on Monday knowing what's in the top 40. Here's one of our webcam girls, and bear in mind, 13-year-olds come in lots of different shapes and sizes. So we've got wild-haired, about to turn into kind of proper big teenagers, and then we've got very sweet little girls like this. And here's one of our 13-year-olds talking to her webcam.
I keep up to date with the latest music from friends who tell me about the music, but mostly from the radio, such as Capital Station, and they usually announce the top 40.
I listen to Capital and Radio 1 radio stations, and I use YouTube mainly to listen to music, but people also post songs on Facebook.
And they're really good, especially the radio, because they do say the top 40, so you know the newest songs and you can see. And the websites are good, especially iTunes Store. I find them most useful because you can see which of the new songs are available.
So you can see these two girls are just kind of being led along by the top 40 and by radio, and have managed to pick up a slight Vicky Pollard accent. These girls were in London. I don't know where they got that little Bristol twang from, but nevertheless they managed to pick it up from somewhere. It must be highly aspirational to have that. Do they go straight to online? Actually, the answer is no. There's a really clear path for these kids. That starts with radio. It involves a kind of YouTube second checking session, a filtering. They listen to it a couple of times on YouTube, and that's all YouTube plays. There's very little initiation of kind of music searching and music discovery direct to YouTube. It nearly always happened radio first, then they hit YouTube, and if it's good enough, we then saw quite a lot of translation into iTunes. There is a kind of compensatory bias going on in this increasingly digital age. They like having the artwork, they like having the kind of seal of approval that comes with a real iTunes purchase. A lot of these guys on shared computers, so piracy and ripping stuff off Russian websites, less so, because if they put a virus on Dad's computer they're going to be murdered. So we found actually they're quite conservative when it comes to their behaviour digitally, and we found that the route was radio, second check on YouTube, and then to iTunes. You do get a little bit of emerging kind of Last FM behaviour, okay? Actually, at this age, they don't really want full control over this. I don't think they know I think that cursor on Last FM beeps, and they're not really sure what to put into it. Beyond, they've got a couple of guesses, but actually they run out of steam on this. We did have one kid who was, and as I say, they come in different flavours, these kids. There is one kid who was a bit more sophisticated, a bit more advanced, a bit more grown up. You can guess he had older brothers and sisters. And he was just starting to get into a bit of Last FM, and he'd grown his hair.
So you mentioned Last FM.
Yes.
What would you like about Last FM?
I think the simplicity of it, as in, on a radio, it's different to a radio because on a radio, it's not the songs that you want to listen to all the time. Like, let's say you listen to it, and next thing you hate this song, and then you don't like this song. But then on Last FM, they play the songs that you like, what you pick. Like, let's say I type in Michael Jackson, they'll play Michael Jackson, and then they'll give me a bit of Jackson 5, and they'll incorporate the stuff that I like. like pop, they'll start doing like pop with a certain genre to it.
They all seem to have picked up strange accents. I could have sworn he had a slightly Brummie accent there. To say we've been within the M25, it's amazing. Very limited use of these kind of websites at the moment. I think at 13 and a half, they're just waiting to be handheld through this a bit more than they're willing to start experimenting on their own. And then we get on to devices, okay? So we then have to think about where devices fit in all this. And I've always treated media a bit like an ecosystem. Actually, it doesn't turn into a kind of Reservoir Dogs, last man standing, kind of limping, bloodied from the warehouse, having killed everyone else. It just isn't like that. Ecosystems adapt and survive, and this isn't a kind of a shootout. And you know, as Margot described, share of ear, we see other devices coming in. What we're seeing is a generation who've got computer right at the heart of it. So computer acts as a hub, and then other devices sit around this, be it mobile, be it iPods and music devices, their radio. But it's the computer that sits in the heart of it. They've digitised their library. We saw hardly any physical ownership of music media. Hardly any. 10 CDs, 5 CDs. Doesn't mean they've got 60 tracks, but the actual amount of real CDs sat in their room was very, very limited. And often those have been burned and played with. They've received those from other people. You'd be happy to know they're still making compilations, so some things absolutely never change. But digital libraries are absolutely norm because of this digital kind of hub that the computer plays. Have they all got computers in their room? Not all of them. So a lot of them have just got to log in on. There is a kind of family box sat downstairs somewhere, and that's what they're putting their library onto. What does this mean for us in the as kind of media people? If you've read Chris Anderson's Long Tail, this is it, alive and well. They are very long tail listeners. Highly fragmented libraries. Number of albums bought, we had kids who didn't have any albums, digitally or physically. So what they've got is incredibly long tail of individual songs. Often they don't really know the artist. It's song by song, top 40, YouTube, by, and they've got this incredibly long tail of highly fragmented tastes. In fact, it's rarely unified by genre, because as stuff comes in and out of the chart, they find themselves bouncing around genres even more. So it's lots of idiosyncratic individual purchases that create a very long tail of consumption. So you get this highly fragmented set of tastes. And you know, I've done enough radio research to know that everyone in groups will always tell you that they want lots of variety and research in music. They always want more variety. They always think that we're kind of beating them to death with the same 6 songs, and you know, we know in this room that isn't strictly true. With these long tail consumers though, variety and broad mix of genres, being able to dance around between the different styles, being able to offer people a slightly richer palette is surely a direction that we're going to go down, especially if within the ecosystem our role is assisted discovery in helping people through this. Yes, they can go and do their Last FM and YouTube searching, but there is going to be a need to kind of start to mirror their digital libraries, which aren't like you and me grew up with 10 CDs. They're 3,000 songs long, and they're nearly all 1 or 2 tracks at a time. So that's very much the kind of landscape they're listening in. And as Margot said, the editorial aspect of radio is also a driver. You'd be expected in here just to hear that music is actually everything. And what we did find was that presenters kept coming back as an important part of the mix. Why is that? Desire for the adult world. This is just being part of discussion with mum and dad, being treated like an adult by these guys, and they kept, they kept getting mentioned. So actually, not a gloomy view of radio at all. Actually, I think at 13 and a half it plays a really important role. I think the qual really shows up kind of how it works and why it works and what it's got to offer. But actually, I think a relatively upbeat view from the world of 13 and a half year olds. Thank you very much.